By and large, the Disney pin community is filled with absolutely wonderful people, people who share a love of Disney and a passion for collecting. However, as the case with pretty much any hobby or any facet of life, there are some bad eggs that can come along and ruin it. So what I wanted to do in today's video is talk about some of the most common scams you're likely to come across in the Disney pin community and how to try to keep yourself safe from them. I'm going to put a link in the description for the Facebook group PSA Pin Scam Alerts, which essentially is a reference check group. You can get a reference check on any person on Facebook, Instagram, eBay, and others will share their experiences with that person. It's also become a catalog for known scammers within the community. I don't totally agree with everything with how the group runs, but it's probably the best way to keep yourself aware of any active members in the community who may be trying to scam you. So I wanted to break things down into in-person scams and then online scams, either with trades or purchase transactions. So there are some ways to be scammed in person, and this will oftentimes happen to people who are less familiar or kind of just getting started in pin trading and collecting. So the people who you need to be wary of are those who are kind of branded as pin sharks. There are tons of lovely people who will bring their pin trading books to the Disney parks and seek to trade with other guests, but there are also some less than savory characters who will do that too. These will be people who will oftentimes have inexperienced pin traders come up to them and be interested in their pins. However, this pin shark will say, well, I'm not really interested in any of your pins, but if you go in that store and purchase that limited edition pin for me, then I'll trade that for you. So oftentimes they'll do this when a pin that they have, they know it's much lower in value, and they're trying to get you something that is way higher of value. So this isn't necessarily anything where they're stealing from you or you're per se losing out on a pin, but they are in a sense scamming you and trying to take advantage of your naivete. So if you come across a person in the parks who is like, hey, I don't know about that pin, but if you go in there and buy that pin for me, then I'll trade, that's where you need to kind of say no and walk away. The other type of scam that you can encounter in person is sometimes these sharks will knowingly trade you fake pins. We all know just how common fake pins are among cast member lanyards, but sometimes other guests can knowingly trade a fake pin so that they in return can get an authentic pin. Sometimes they may have fake limited edition pins in which you'll be out quite a bit if you traded an authentic pin in exchange. So that's just something to be conscious of if you are a little bit newer to pin trading and are looking to trade with other kind of hardcore guests in the parks. Like I said, there are tons of lovely people in the community who will bring tons of their pins to the parks and do want to trade with other guests, and they will have great experiences, but there are unfortunately some sharks in the water, and you do want to keep your eye out for them. So that'll typically be the extent of what you can encounter in person, but when pin trading or selling and buying online, there are a lot of other scams that you can run into. With this, I'm first going to talk about scams with strict pin trading. So the most common thing that can happen here is you agree to set up a trade with a person, you exchange addresses, you mail off your pins to them, and they don't send anything back to you. And unfortunately with this, unless you kind of figure out halfway through and are able to intercept the package before it's delivered, if that package gets delivered, it's very, very difficult to get that other person to send back your pins or to send out their end of the trade. So if a situation like this has occurred to you where you have not yet received your end of the trade, you're messaging them, but they're not responding, what you need to do is contact the administrators or moderators of whatever pin group you traded in, and then they will step in to see what else they can sort out. So I'm an admin in the Disney Kitty pin group, which I will link to that group in the description too. Thankfully, we have not had too many instances of this occurring. But if there is, unfortunately, an unsavory person who has slid through the cracks, as an administrator, I'll first contact the other person and say, you have not mailed out your pins. If you don't send them out ASAP, you will be removed and banned from the group. Sometimes that is enough to kind of get the person to move along. Sometimes people may not realize that they're scamming, and once they kind of are threatened with an authority figure, then they'll step in. But then there are others who it is their goal to just scam people. So then at least what we do is we remove the person from the Facebook group, we block them so that they are never able to join again, and then on a group like PSA, we'll put out an alert that says, hey, this person has scammed members, they did not mail out their end of the trade, they did not respond to any messages, check out if they're in your groups, check to see if they've had any issues there, and then you can kind of work to spread that warning throughout the entire community so that people know not to deal with this person. Now, a person may have multiple Facebook profiles, so this is where it's helpful if you have a mailing address that, oh, I mailed to this person at this address and it's the exact same address for this other person. You can kind of cross-check accounts and see if they're acting through another platform. As well, in the Disney Kitty group, we make all people who request to join answer some security questions. So with that, we're mainly checking to see that people have found the group through YouTube or other similar sources. We also check to see that the profile is kind of valid. If the profile was just recently created, we are not going to let that person join. Because if you've just made a fresh Facebook profile, that does not lend a lot of confidence. Anybody could have just made a fresh Facebook profile. There's no kind of backlog of an actual active personal history there. So that's a course of action we try to take with people who are running trading scams. As well, what you can do is threaten some sort of legal or police action against the person. I'm not sure if something like this would fall into mail fraud, but if you do live in the same state as the person who has scammed you in a trade, you can try and reach out to local authorities. It's definitely easier if multiple people have been affected, then there'll be a higher chance that a case can be brought up against them. But in my experiences, a lot of times this has happened to people. It's kind of been a cut your losses and warn everybody to not send to this person, to not mail to this address. Then there's also a number of scams you can come across as a buyer, say if you're just trying to purchase pins instead of trading them. The number one cardinal rule to always follow when purchasing pins online is typically payment is done through PayPal, and you should always and only pay as goods and services. Goods and services gives you protection as a buyer. You can file a claim with PayPal if you do not receive the item that you ordered. With paying as goods and services, there is a small PayPal service fee. For a typical PIN transaction, it's usually not more than $1 or $2. The seller themselves is supposed to cover the fee, so it's not supposed to be a burden on the buyer itself. But you should never send any payment other than goods and services via PayPal. The other option to send on PayPal is as friends and family, in which there is no service fee. And if you send money to somebody as friends and family, and then they don't send you what you ordered, you are totally out of luck because you sent that as friends and family, which is only intended to be sent as a friend or a family. Friends and family is much more similar to Venmo in this sense. You know, say if you're like paying somebody back for dinner or whatnot, you will often see a person request payment as friends and family if they're trying to skirt out on the PayPal fee. In which case, if I do see that, then I'll say, hey, I will add on another $1 or $2 and cover the fee because I am not going to be unprotected. Sometimes people will want to be sent as friends and family because they are trying to kind of skirt the law and not pay their proper taxes. Because I believe if you take in something over like $10,000 as goods and services on PayPal, you will be taxed as income. But I think friends and family is different. So some people try for tax evasion, and then others will say friends and families, so that way that you send them money and then they don't send you anything. This also goes along with do not send through Venmo, do not send through Cash App, do not send through the built-in Facebook payment system. Just ingrain it when you are going through a purchasing transaction that includes a good or a service, you will only pay as goods and services. In the majority of the PIN groups that I'm in, they require that payment is only as PayPal goods and services, where if you encounter a seller in one of those groups who is trying to skirt through and have things sent as friends and family or via Venmo, you need to let those administrators know so that they can get in contact with that person and issue a warning or remove them from the group. Generally, the only time when you acceptably see PayPal friends and family payments sent in PIN groups is when people are running opportunities and raffles, and they're having you send that money as friends and family because those types of raffles are against PayPal's terms and services. So what they are doing is not allowed. Those opportunity drawings are just straight gambling, and I really don't suggest that you try those opportunities or raffles. Sure, somebody is going to win and get a high value pin, but more likely than not, you're just going to spend and lose money and you'll be assisting people who are skirting around PayPal's terms. So what's so nice about paying with PayPal goods and services is that from the date of the transaction, you have 180 days to dispute and file a claim if you did not receive the item or if the item was not in the specified condition. The only time when you can run into issues with this is, say, if a seller did have you pay through goods and services and they do provide a tracking number, but then maybe they don't send it out. Maybe they put in the same tracking number for multiple people. Maybe that tracking number is for some physical thing that does actually get delivered and it says item delivered, but you did not actually receive anything, or maybe you were sent just a blank envelope. So if you're ever feeling like sketchy about a transaction, and even if you paid as goods and services and don't feel super good about it, whenever you receive the said item, take a video of yourself so that you can send it as evidence if you are contacting PayPal. When you do file a claim on PayPal, PayPal will kind of go back to the initial seller, and then the seller can kind of give info about what's going on. But if the seller just doesn't respond after a certain amount of time, you're automatically awarded back your money. There's also a really nice similar kind of buyer-backed system on eBay, since I did encounter and had to file claims with eBay and PayPal over a seller who just did not ship items. The seller at the time probably had hundreds of open orders and just didn't ship anything, didn't message back anything. And then so you have to go in through eBay and then file a claim, so you have not received the item. If the seller never responds or provides anything, they then award in your favor and give you your money back. So with similar kind of scams on eBay, it's much easier for the buyer to get their money back and have things go according to plan. But that's why with other general transactions, you have to be careful about how you're paying. Now, the one final thing I wanted to talk about in terms of ways that you can get scammed is fantasy pin makers, because there has not been one, there's not been two, there's been at least 3 or 4 fantasy pin makers as of late who have taken in thousands to tens of thousands of dollars in pre-sale money and then just not delivered anything. And so fantasy pins are kind of the exception, where even if you do pay as PayPal goods and services, you can still lose out on money if the creator just decides to steal all that money and not put the pins into production. So oftentimes with a lot of the kind of detailed, higher quality fantasy pins, sometimes there can be production issues, sometimes there can be mold remakes, things can take a long time. So production can last longer than 6 months, which is the PayPal protection window. Oftentimes when you buy into a fantasy pin pre-sale, they kind of have the artwork. Sometimes they'll already have a proof, but people will buy into a pre-sale until there is enough money secured to then pay the factory to then make the pin. And so there are quite a number of fantasy pins where it can be longer than 6 months between when you send in the money and then when you receive the pin. Now, what some fantasy pin makers have done as of late, oftentimes they will establish themselves as a good business. They will, in fact, deliver pins. Sometimes there may be quite long production waits, but they kind of establish themselves as a maker. But then it gets to a point where something changes, or, they kind of realize that, hey, they just took in thousands to tens of thousands of dollars of pre-sale money, where they could pay the factory to put those pins into production, or they could just keep that money for themselves. And so they can kind of, just string along the buyers. Maybe they paid for a single sample to be made. Maybe they didn't actually pay for production costs. Maybe they're saying, oh, the factory has issues. Oh, I need to move this to a different factory. So kind of delays accumulate until you get to that point when you're beyond the 180-day mark and you're outside of your PayPal protection. So with this case of fantasy pin makers, what you need to do is, if you are getting close to that 180-day window, you need to tell the fantasy pin maker that you want to be refunded and repay so that your PayPal protection starts again anew. If the maker refuses to do so, then you need to file a claim, because that is a big warning sign. A maker should always be extremely transparent and accommodating in that sense, because they want their buyers to be protected too. Sometimes it can be difficult, because if a maker is being really difficult and you want the pin, you might not want to give up your opportunity to have the promised pin that you purchased, because once you're outside of your PayPal 180-day window, there's nothing you can do. PayPal will automatically deny a claim if you try and follow it. What you sometimes can do in this sense, if you paid with a credit card, you can dispute the charge with your credit card company. Oftentimes for banks, they will have an even shorter protection window than PayPal, so it's best not to have paid directly, like with a debit card or a bank card. With these longer term fantasy pin transactions, it's better to have it on a credit card in case they can step in when PayPal doesn't. But it's just been so unfortunate that there have been multiple fantasy pin creators in the community who have stolen collectively, upwards of $100,000 from people. And with some of that, people are within the PayPal window and they can file a claim, they will get their money back. But once they're outside, then you are out of money. So with this particular case, these makers have oftentimes scammed a large amount of people. Then you need to file a police report. Generally, if there are enough reports received against a said person, the police will follow through with it. Likely that won't result in you getting your money back, but the person who stole these tens of thousands of dollars, they will face the consequences of their actions. So with these large-scale scams, it is best, if you've been affected, to go ahead and pursue the legal means. So I'm extra emphasizing this part about making sure that you get a refund and resend money to reset your PayPal protection, because I didn't do that because the maker had been trustworthy, and then, oh, well, they just stole tens of thousands of dollars from everybody. I am outside of PayPal protection and there's nothing I can do. But then that is why you file a police report, so that the police can take care of everything. So I know this video is kind of, a downer in the sense of, oh gosh, there's like so many things to worry about, but really this is a very small fraction of the encounters that you'll find in pin trading and collecting. Most traders and sellers really are lovely people, and it's just this kind of small few who just enjoy these criminal activities and decide they want to infiltrate. But then that's why there's places like PSA pin scam alerts, where then everybody's kind of alerted to look out for this person and do not deal with them in any context. So in summary, when you're dealing in person in the parks with another collector, kind of be on the lookout for those who are kind of the pin sharks. I'd recommend making sure you are kind of experienced enough in pin trading to kind of like know the signs of somebody who may be trying to, deceitfully give you a fake or try to give you a really bad deal where you're spending money for something that really isn't worth anything. With trading online, make sure you feel comfortable about it. If you have this bad gut feeling and neither has mailed out the pins, neither has created a shipping label, you can say, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable trading. And then maybe if you need, you can have a reference check for that person, see if anybody else has had any iffy interactions. Make sure you report any activity of not receiving a trade to a moderator or administrator of the group. The one thing I didn't mention is if you're just trading on Instagram, a lot of people have their own pin pages. You are basically on your own. There's no kind of like higher up you can reach out to, so make sure you're kind of very comfortable with the person. They kind of have like a nice established profile. And then whenever you're going to be buying pins, always and only pay as PayPal goods and services. Do not let anybody talk you into friends and family unless you are sending money to your actual friend and family. And then accordingly with that, always make sure that your purchase is within the 180-day PayPal protection. And if you're getting close, make sure you can refund and resend the money so that protection will reset and resume. If anybody else has any helpful tips or kind of like experiences dealing with scams, feel free to leave them in the description, because the best way to avoid them and stay safe from them is to be educated about it. But thanks for watching!